afternoon. So lovely to be here with you all. We've taken a little bit of a hiatus with respect to our live sessions here on the Facebook page. We, as most of you know, we did a series of videos on COVID-19 with a number of different experts. And now we are headed towards our annual conference, which will be this November, with a focus on immune resilience. So what we thought we would do in this interim is to give you some information to get you inspired and to think broadly about immune resilience. So today our special guest is Kasia, who has a background in functional nutrition, and she has a lot of passion around Epstein-Barr virus, EBV. And so we are going to learn about another virus. We're going to learn about this virus. How do you measure it? What can you do for it? And in light of COVID-19, really thinking about the layering effects of all of these different viruses, right? The viral load. So Kasia, it is so wonderful to be here with you this afternoon talking about viruses.
Yes, let's do it. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So let me ask you, because we know each other a little bit from our interest in detoxification. What led you down the path towards EBV, Epstein-Barr? How did you get interested in it?
There's different levels and layers. If you look at more spiritual, personal layer, I lost a very close friend to MS. And so I was always asking why I was not able to help her. And so I think it's just when you ask the questions, you start getting answers. And so my frustration was that also my patients were presenting, some areas that were just not responding to anything that you or I would be doing. And so there was something in it that was bothering me. And then basically the population, like if you do functional medicine or functional nutrition, you're going to end up working with the chronic illnesses, and a chunk of percentage of that population will be chronic EBV. And so, and then the nail in the coffin, the last nail was when a couple of my patients requested that I read medical medium and provide an informed kind of opinion on it. And so I actually read it on a plane to a conference because I didn't have time to read, and I almost fell off the chair because I was reading stories about my patients. So basically when I came from the conference, I started to dig into lab testing and the complexities and so on and so forth, and then we started to test, and then we started, and the rest is history. But basically I jumped on an opportunity to bridge the gap between what medical medium was claiming and what we actually can verify in medical literature. And that's how my medical literature review started during my doctoral program, where you and I met, if you remember. And so that, and then I was asked to write a book based on that, which I said, I've never written a book and I don't have time. What are you talking about? But Liz Lipsky, my husband, everybody around said it had to be done. So I did, because I had studied under Dr. Vasquez, so I had a great introduction to virology from him. And so I started to hone in on a protocol, and this is the result of it. So basically, I think we are the result in our practice of the presentation of our patients and what needs to be done to help them, basically. And as long as we keep an eye and an ear open and ask the questions and our labs, but whether it's spiritually, whether it's just coincidences, the right people come and you keep moving. So I think I'm just a messenger. I'm just the right person at the right time, and I just didn't say no. So this is what has happened as a result. I can't take the full credit.
So, wow, what a path. And so it started with a friend, and then it really moved into the sphere of looking at patients, different clients that you've had. And then also, yes, the medical medium. Can you say a little bit more for people who aren't aware of the medical medium and Anthony Williams' focus on viruses? Just a little bit of background so people have a little bit of a sense of what that's about.
he's been writing books for a number of years, and the first book was called Medical Medium. He says that since he was 8 years old, he has been hearing a spirit of compassion, that apparently every few hundred years it picks, the spirit picks a human, and the human can either handle it or not. And so apparently he was doing consultations for years, and now he's just putting it all into social media and books and so on. And I had to say that a lot of what he said in the book makes sense from a clinical perspective, even though he doesn't have validation. He's all, just conveying the messages he's getting directly from the spirit. However, whether you believe it or not is one aspect of it. Some people are really offended, and medical community, of course, that's a very, in a way, incompatible area. And so understandably, a medical doctor may really be infuriated or frustrated if a patient insists on lab testing and so on and so forth, just because they read Medical Medium. And Medical Medium has a great list of stories. And so it's like thousands and thousands of people can relate and say, that's my story, I have to have EBV. And the point is, like, I thought, even if half of it is true, what if all these patients that I remember that I couldn't help, it's like, oh my gosh, when I started to backtrack, it's like, that is a classic presentation, actually. But we didn't know. I remember when I just had the functional, Institute for Functional Medicine had the international conference for autoimmunity, and I was late, so I was able to do a poster. And I remember, the poster is 30 minutes, but I was there 1.5 hours, and people were still standing there and asking questions because there's need. So I know that clinicians are looking because we're seeing that. And because of Medical Medium, it comes to more like, attention. And then I remember at the same conference, there was a speaker who talked about viruses, especially EBV. And he has partial results, and he had some good information. He didn't have a system I device because it took me a while, but he did great. He had standing ovation right there and there. Standing ovation. That's how needed it is. And that was a few years ago. So I really felt like there's a big gap, and somebody needed to take that information. So whether it's a clinical nutritionist or a functional medical doctor or practitioner, or a person who is ill, anybody can take that information, do something with it, and maybe even recover. And yes, recovery is possible, actually. It's recorded in medical literature.
Yeah.
So I digress. So we have only 30 minutes, so you need to direct me.
Yeah. No,
about this.
This is good. And I would like you to talk about why EBV in light of other viruses. There are so many viruses that are out there, whether herpes or, there's a whole host of different ones. And we just have great visibility now to SARS-CoV-2, which is brand new. But why, how do we stack up all the viruses and compare them to each other? What conditions do we need to be thinking about as it relates to EBV, and how do we actually get tested? How would we detect symptoms?
Yeah. So that's a Pandora box.
So it's a big topic. If you can just kind of break it out for us very, very simply.
Oh yeah, of course. So a couple of buckets. So first of all, there's the concept of it's a virus that has been with us for 1 million years. And basically, if you look at research, serology, 95+% of global population has the virus. We all have the virus. It's like you can't kill it off and be sterile. We have to live with it. Typically, if your immune system has resilience, then you may have mono, which is like maybe the worst flu in your life, 6 weeks, and maybe you're even bedridden. And then you should pick up and live your life. Except what is not understood in medical literature and medical practices, that there's even a name, a chronic mononucleosis syndrome. And if you compare the studies and in symptology, it's very, very compatible with chronic fatigue syndrome, of course, because in a percentage of population, they never go to baseline before mono, after mono. And then it just has trickling effect. And then eventually it can corrode into your immune system and cause autoimmunity. There was a fabulous study by Dr. Harley just, I think, 2 years ago or 2 years ago, just before I published the book. So I was able to put that study in there. When he looked, he found a protein in EBV that actually went into the DNA that coded for autoimmunity and turned on genes for 7 autoimmune disorders. Now, get this: rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, MS, diabetes type 1, celiac. After that study, I started to track celiac. I started to see more of that. Celiac tumor. What did I miss? Juvenile idiopathic arthritis. Did I say lupus?
Yes.
Inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's, and celiac. And when I actually looked at it, about 60% of either of them can be initially triggered by this virus. Plus, so I have a laundry list of autoimmune disorders, whether it's a connective tissue disorder, whether it's inflammation of the brain. There's different. Just list goes on and on. But the bottom line is, we also have quite a substantial number of types of cancer. Like 10% of stomach cancer is caused by EBV in literature. And then it's oncogenic. It can cause a laundry list of cancer. And most recently, they're evaluating colorectal cancer and breast cancer. They're noticing patterns like more aggressive cancer in the breast tissue. There's EBV and so on and so forth. So there's causation, we don't know. So they're looking at that. It's the only virus that can cause all the trickling effect. So I see all kinds of cases because I pretty much work with this all the time right now. So it is a big virus, and it has a trickling effect. So, and the problem is that, people say you have this lysing of the cells that are infected, but then you have this dormant period when you don't have lysing, and people assume that's okay. But the problem is, in literature, when you see the infected B cells, B as in boy, your immune cells, they lost the ability to communicate, to be terminated. They are completely infected and completely immortalized, a little bit like cancer cells. And then they continue cloning. And apparently between lysing, so between the reinfection or reactivation, as we call it, this dormant latent state is where the virus actually relies on its life cycle much more, because it relies on the B cells, on their cloning, because all the material is in the B cells. So the more B cells you have, the more the virus can use the DNA to create RNA to make new virons, as they call. And then when they're ready, when you have a good opportunity, triggering effect, they lyse the cell, they spill into the blood. So the problem with testing is PCR is DNA testing. If you catch it during the spilling, the lysing, when the virus is in the bloodstream, you're going to pick up some of the DNA. But that's very short, 2-3 weeks, max 4. And so I don't recommend PCR because it's confusing. And if you look at studies, the efficacy of testing PCR in chronically infected people is low. It will increase, it will show much more in the initial infection. So it's not that practical. And then people are confused about the antibodies, right? Mm-hmm. So if I'm saying that 95% plus of population, if 95%, if most of us have the virus, well, what if you check the antibodies and everything is negative? What do you do with that? Does it mean that you are living in the bubble and you've never been exposed? Probably not. Most likely you don't build immunoglobulins. So the easiest thing to do for clinicians is to ask to test the total immunoglobulin IgG and IgM, for example, because these are antibodies are IgG, IgM. So if these come low, you're not going to show them. So then if you have positives, then we will talk about that in a moment. But the biggest thing for a clinician is, am I doing everything for this patient? Do I know what they have? Do they have different diagnosis of chronic illness, autoimmunity? Do they have Hashimoto's? That's very common, for example. Do they have lupus? Now, Hashimoto's, I didn't mention it before, but Hashimoto's is such applied for women, Low thyroid is such applied in medical clinic, but 95% of low thyroid is actually Hashimoto's if you look at up to 95. So you can miss Hashimoto's, but if you test for it and it's there, it actually could be triggered by EBV. And I've had cases when we reversed it just working on EBV. So if there is immunity, if they're not responding well, if they're not responding well to ketogenic diet, for example, that's really not a good fit for EBV. If they're not responding to autoimmune paleo, especially long term, that's not sustainable. That's kind of an indication that would maybe barking at the wrong tree. You have to look at that virus because it has such tentacles, and it affects your immunity, it affects your thinking. So before we go into testing, let's go about some common symptoms. Yeah. So there's very odd presentations, commonly brain fog, of course, inability to function, sometimes cognitive decline. So people are afraid that they're actually sliding. The fatigue there's this normal fatigue, but there's this overwhelming fatigue and exhaustion when you cannot walk from the kitchen to the sofa. That's the kind of fatigue. Inability to exercise and lack of recovery post-exercise. Terrible. You can be bedridden for another 3 days if you just try to exercise, because the virus creates so much oxidative stress. If you add oxidative stress for exercise, you're going to collapse. Some people have a lot of anxiety, even though they're not anxious. Commonly, they will wake up in the middle of the night with heart palpitations, for example. Anxiety, heart palpitations, anxiety about being in the car driving or flying or even riding in a car sometimes. Oddballs, there's tons of things. Sometimes it's muscular, skeletal pain, incredible, terrible pain. If you throw some symptoms at me, it probably could be.
I'm just wondering, because so much of the symptoms that you're mentioning, they are really overlapping on so many other things, right? And even within COVID-19, we think of the comorbidities that set the stage for a virus. Yeah. So how do we know if it's causal or if it's just opportunistic?
Correct. Well, it will take a little time to investigate and work together. Now, first of all, in April, there was a study in Hunan that showed that the people with active COVID had more incidence of EBV at the same time. So for me, I don't know, testing for COVID is so inaccurate. And PCR also is so inaccurate for COVID. So for me, I wouldn't know which one is which, because you could have, there've been cases recorded of pneumonia that was actually triggered or even caused by EBV. It's not usual, it's not typical, but they've been. So I don't know. So the question was, let me see.
How do we know if it's causal? Is it causal or just opportunistic? Is it just associated with the milieu that's been created in the system?
Yeah, it is opportunistic. It is opportunistic. That's the number one. So, well, first of all, if you look at medical research first, if it's idiopathic condition, idiopathic meaning we don't know what caused it, the researchers suggest test for EBV. If it's refractory, so it doesn't respond to traditional therapy that should be responded to, expect EBV and test for it. Okay, so let's look at testing. Do 4 antibodies. There is a 5th antibody, which is really good, but nobody tested. Very few labs tested. So the classic four antibodies is VCA-IgG, VCA-IgM, early antigen IgG, and nuclear factor IgG. So the nuclear antigen IgG. The nuclear antigen IgM is the 5th one. If you can get it, do it. And the problem is that the labs are really misinterpreted, a little bit like thyroid. And so that's messy, and I have people spinning for years because either in the problem in clinical practice is that doctors say it's a waste of time and money to test because we all have it, and so that's it. So the door is closed, so people can't really test it. But there are labs direct to consumer when you can get it done in a day and know what you have. So we created a website page with all the interpretation. There's even 50-minute video from Facebook Live I did, like with a whiteboard, drawing, color. It's on our EBV help website as well, so people can get educated. It's very easy to get confused by the labs, but they're not that confusing if you actually get it. And the most important thing is not to skip early antigen. You have to add that to know if you're reactivating right now or not. That's the bottom line.
Interesting. So it sounds like
I can go in detail.
There's a lot. Sorry, I think there's a little bit of a lag in our Wi-Fi. I just wanted to ask in our remaining minutes too, I want to be sure that we capture this since our focus here with the American Nutrition Association is on nutrition. So what are some of the things? Let's just assume that we're symptomatic. Let's just assume that in the imperfect world of testing that we might have some indication. What are some nutrition and lifestyle strategies that are known to be effective for people who are maybe rather than being dormant and asymptomatic, that they actually have some presentation that would align to EBV?
Huge opportunity for our field, huge opportunity. Basically, this book is dedicated to nutritionists or written for nutritionists because they can grab it and run with it. The biggest reactivating factor is stress, the biggest one. Hands down, it's very well researched. I know that I'm sorry, my brain is right. If you go to space, you actually prophylactically get antiviral medication so you don't reactivate Epstein-Barr virus. Probably because of hypoxia, but also because of probably stress, physiological stress on the body. Stress does it. And anybody who knows that have chronic EBV will tell you they remember what happened. Somebody died, the combination of stressors, deep, personal, real, physical, emotional. So this is a great opportunity for us, digging around, finding it, healing that, post trauma, maybe healing that trauma, and also having tools like herbs, adaptogenic herbs, B vitamins, just to work through current stressors that they can't control. Breathing, all that. That's number one. Sleep deprivation will definitely be a problem. Any changes in hormones, so postpartum depression, postpartum situation, perimenopause, menopause, those stages, sometimes even cyclical within the cycle, the monthly cycle, if the virus is really aggressive. Those changes during the monthly cycle can also help the EBV resurface. So it's a good indication of how well you're doing. The diet, environmental exposure is huge. So for example, in early July, I always send messages in social media, avoid fireworks, avoid sitting by the fire pit, grilling, all the smoke, all the dioxin, burning forest in Northwest or in California. You're going to reactivate, dioxin's reactivated, we've seen studies. And so I get a lot of feedback on that because people get really anxious. They don't know, they're trying so hard and suddenly they dip again. They don't know why. That's dioxin. This is summer, we're grilling, so be careful. Stay away from that smoke. Environmentally, potentially heavy metals, especially mercury. The biggest culprit I see in our community is Wi-Fi technology and EMF. I have to say that I get feedback constantly, and it's consistent. So just cleaning, boxing the router, turning the Wi-Fi for the night, checking if you have smart meter or not, boxing it, or refusing it, whatever you can do, turning off. We have getting some control over this is air tubes, for example. No EMF. Turn off the blue light. Watch TV with the yellow blue blocking glasses. it actually does have an effect on potentially reactivating the virus. And then the diet.
I'm curious,
So,
what kind of science and published research is available on different nutritional approaches? Is there much in this field?
there's not much specifically for EBV diet, no. However, what we know and what works is very consistent. Antioxidants, extremely simple. The oxidative stress that the virus produces is the worst, and antioxidants is what we have. And so it's fruits, vegetables. People are afraid of fruits in our country. They really don't consume half of what they need, because they're afraid of it, because these are carbs, sugar, and so on and so forth. You need to have fiber in the roughage from plants in order to support your microbiome, so your microbiome can produce butyric acid. Butyric acid actually feeds T regulatory cells, and T regulatory cells can turn off the T17, like autoimmune triggering T cells, and so it supports the immune system. It's like the big Superman in your immune system, Tregs. So there's your fiber, there's your roughage, there's your antioxidants. And basically, if you focus on what was amazing in the studies I did and then in my practice, was when I focused the EBV researched antioxidants. They single-handedly, in supplements on top of the diet, they single-handedly turned off the virus. And we're talking about selenium, we're talking about zinc, we're talking about vitamin E, vitamin A, and then NAC and lysine. So, and licorice. These are the 7. I always like to start with these 7 because if you dose them properly, we have this favorite jumpstart bundle where everybody starts on the highest doses that are medically safe. Within 3 weeks, if it's EBV, you start turning it around. And eventually you can turn it off within a day or 2, once you already recover. So this is a good beginning, but if you don't respond to these 7, then you know that it's either not EBV, because it's very consistent, or you have core infections, heavy metal, toxicity, molds, that will cloud completely and disable your ability to run the protocol. Co-infection and Wi-Fi technology. So these are the things that get in the way. These are the big things. And mold is probably the most tragic because
Definitely.
it's the hardest. And we are totally cornered. You have
Kasia, thank you so much. That is such a, I feel like we all need to have this information about viruses in general. And it seems like based on what you mentioned, there are some common denominators, things that would go across the board with so many viruses. Like if we would just focus on having a nutrient-dense diet, having adequate fiber, as you mentioned.
Your wonderful colors.
Yes, absolutely. Exactly, yeah. Which helps us with the oxidative stress. We're hearing so much about the cytokine storm with COVID, right? Yeah. So thank you so much for, this is really a brief thumbnail of your vast knowledge in this area of Epstein-Barr. And I think it's one of the things that we need to be thinking about is we think of toxic load. We need to be thinking of viral load and how to bring that down. And again, there are some similar strategies that we can use across the board.
Yeah. It's a perfect tools for a nutritionist. We are primed for this.
Exactly. Everybody doing lifestyle. I want to get everybody on board doing lifestyle medicine. I think this is really the wave of where we need to go to reduce comorbidities with all of these infections. So thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure talking with you and catching up with your passion in the area.
Thank you.
For all of our viewers, I wanted to mention that if you are interested in more information on the American Nutrition Association, to go to the website, which is theana.org. You're going to see the position paper that we put together on COVID in the early days. We were ahead of the curve on that. So looking at a lot of the phytonutrients and lifestyle strategies. So stay tuned. We are having some guests come on before our conference in November. So sharing their wisdom like Kasia did today. and hopefully on many different topics as it relates to the immune system. So thanks, everybody. Take care. Stay well.